The divorce papers felt surprisingly light in my hands as I sat in the courthouse hallway, watching my signature dry on documents that officially ended 12 years of marriage. The ink was still wet when my phone buzzed with a notification that would change everything. Invitation. You're invited to celebrate Marcus and Sophia's engagement. Saturday, 7 p.m. at the Meridian Country Club. I stared at the screen, my lawyer Catherine still explaining the financial settlements beside me. Marcus, my ex-husband as of 30 minutes ago, was already engaged. To Sophia Chen, the 28-year-old marketing coordinator from his firm. The woman he'd sworn was just a colleague during our mediation sessions, Emma? Catherine's voice seemed to come from underwater. Are you listening? The final asset division means you'll receive. I need to make a call, I interrupted, standing abruptly. The marble floors of the courthouse echoed with each click of my heels as I walked toward the exit, my mind racing. 12 years. 12 years of marriage, and he was celebrating his engagement the same day our divorce was finalized. The audacity was breathtaking, but what stung more was the realization that everyone in my former social circle already knew. The timing of that invitation wasn't coincidental. It was calculated. Outside in the crisp October air, I dialed my sister Rachel. It's done, I said when she answered. How do you feel? She asked gently. Like I just got invited to Marcus's engagement party. Silence. Then, what? I'm holding the invitation right now, tonight. The Meridian. I watched other people walking up and down the courthouse steps, some looking relieved, others defeated. I wasn't sure which category I fell into yet. Emma, you're not actually considering... He told everyone I was the one who destroyed our marriage, that I was controlling, demanding, impossible to live with. My voice was steady, but my hands were shaking. He painted himself as the victim of a bitter wife who couldn't accept that love sometimes dies. Which we both know is complete bullshit. Yes. I leaned against my car, feeling the cold metal through my black blazer. But here's what's interesting, Rachel. I kept receipts. That was an understatement. For the past 18 months, since I first suspected Marcus was cheating, I'd been documenting everything. Not out of vindictiveness, at least not initially, but because my father had drilled into me the importance of protecting yourself in business, and marriage, I'd learned, was often just another kind of business partnership. What kind of receipts? Rachel asked carefully. The kind that show exactly who Marcus Whitmore really is. I pulled out my car keys, suddenly energized. I'm going shopping. Emma. For the perfect engagement party outfit. 3 hours later. I stood in my walk-in closet. The closet Marcus had complained was too large when we bought this house, selecting my armor for the evening. The black Valentino dress I'd bought for his company's last annual gala hung beside a navy Armani that still had tags on it. Both were beautiful, both were expensive, and both sent entirely the wrong message. I wanted something that said former wife who's clearly moved on rather than bitter ex plotting revenge. Even though the latter was closer to the truth, my phone rang as I held up a cream-colored silk wrap dress against myself in the mirror. Mrs. Whitmore? The voice was professional, clipped. This is Detective Morrison from the Fraud Division. We spoke about your husband's business practices. Ex-husband, I thought, but said, Yes, Detective. What can I do for you? We've completed our preliminary investigation into the expense reports you provided. I was hoping we could meet sometime next week to discuss our findings. I set down the dress, my heart beginning to race. Is this about the corporate accounts? Among other things. The amounts we're looking at could constitute felony embezzlement, Mrs. Whitmore. Your documentation has been extremely helpful. After hanging up, I sat heavily on my bed, staring at my reflection in the mirrored closet doors. The woman looking back at me had perfectly styled auburn hair, subtle makeup, and the kind of composure that came from years of practicing law before I'd given up my career to support Marcus's ambitions. That had been mistake number 1. Mistake number 2 had been trusting him with our joint accounts. Mistake number 3 had been not trusting my instincts when the late nights at the office became routine, when the business trips multiplied, When he started working out religiously and buying new clothes. But those weren't really mistakes, were they? They were choices made by a woman who believed in her marriage, who thought partnership meant putting your spouse's needs before your own, who assumed that love meant trust without verification. I'd been naive. But I'd also been thorough. My laptop sat open on the bed where I'd left it after reviewing my files one last time. Folders labeled by month, each containing photographs, bank statements, credit card bills, receipts, and screenshots. 18 months of evidence that Marcus had been living a double life, funded by money he'd been systematically stealing from his own company. The expensive dinners he'd claimed were client meetings? They were dates with Sophia. The weekend business conferences? Romantic getaways. The designer watch he'd said was a bonus for landing a new account? Purchased with embezzled funds. But the really damaging evidence wasn't about the money. It was about what he'd said in writing, about the life we'd built together. About me? I clicked open a folder labeled Personal Communications and scrolled to an email thread from 8 months ago. Marcus to Sophia. God, sometimes I wonder how I stood it for so long. 12 years of pretending to be interested in her tedious career advice and boring friends. At least now I can admit that marrying Emma was the biggest mistake of my life. She never understood that a man needs room to breathe, room to grow. She tried to turn me into some domesticated house pet. She thinks she's so smart with her legal background, but she never figured out what was right in front of her face. Meanwhile, I've been planning our future while she obsessed over every penny in our joint checking account like some anal accountant. The irony is that she's so focused on small details that she missed the bigger picture entirely. I can't wait until this divorce is final, and I can finally admit I've been with you for over a year. Let her have the house. I'll be building something beautiful with you while she grows old and bitter in her suburban prison. The words still stung, but they also strengthened my resolve. Because Marcus was right about one thing, I was detail-oriented. And those details were about to destroy him. I selected the cream silk dress and began getting ready. The Meridian Country Club sat atop a hill overlooking the city, its Georgian architecture and manicured grounds screaming old money and exclusivity. Marcus and I had been members for 5 years, though we'd rarely used the facilities together. He preferred golf with his business associates. I preferred the quiet library where I could work on the legal consulting I'd started doing from home. The valet recognized me as I pulled up in my BMW, another asset I'd fought for and won in the divorce settlement. "Good evening, Mrs. Whitmore," he said, taking my keys. "Good evening." "David," I tipped him generously as always. David had been here for 15 years, had watched Marcus and me arrive together for anniversary dinners and company parties. If he was surprised to see me alone on the night of Marcus's engagement party, he was too professional to show it. The main ballroom was decorated with white roses and gold accents, elegant and expensive. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows, the city lights twinkled like scattered diamonds. A string quartet played softly in one corner, while servers circulated with champagne and hors d'oeuvres. And there, in the center of it all, stood Marcus and Sophia, accepting congratulations from a crowd of people I'd once considered friends. Marcus looked exactly the same as he had that morning in court. Tall, silver-haired, wearing the charcoal suit I'd helped him pick out 2 years ago for another company function. Sophia was radiant in blush pink, her left hand prominently displaying what looked like a 3-carat diamond solitaire. The ring was beautiful. It was also paid for with stolen money. I took a glass of champagne from a passing server and surveyed the room, recognizing faces from Marcus's law firm, the country club, and our former couple friends. The ones who'd apparently chosen sides in the divorce and decided Marcus was the innocent party. "Emma?" A voice behind me made me turn. Jennifer Walsh, one of my former book club members, approached with obvious discomfort. "I didn't expect to see you here." "Neither did I until this morning," I replied truthfully, taking a sip of champagne. Funny how timing works out. Jennifer's eyes darted toward Marcus and Sophia, then back to me. How are you handling all this?" "Better than expected, actually. The divorce was finalized this morning, so the timing is quite serendipitous. I kept my voice light, conversational. It feels good to have closure. That's good. Good for you. Jennifer looked like she wanted to escape. Well, I should probably... Jennifer. I touched her arm gently. I hope you and Tom are well. I've missed our book discussions. The kindness in my voice seemed to surprise her. I've missed them too, actually. Maybe we could... after things settle down, I'd like that. And I meant it. Not all bridges needed to burn tonight. As Jennifer walked away, I noticed Marcus had spotted me. His face went through a series of expressions: surprise, alarm, anger, before settling on the practiced charm he used in court. He whispered something to Sophia, who looked toward me with curious eyes, then began making his way through the crowd in my direction. Showtime. Emma. He stopped just close enough to be polite, far enough to maintain distance. What are you doing here? Celebrating, I replied simply. It's been quite a day for both of us. His jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. You could have called. Given me a heads up that you were planning to attend. I wasn't planning to attend until I received the invitation this afternoon. Such perfect timing. My divorce finalized this morning, your engagement party tonight. It's almost poetic. Marcus glanced around, clearly aware that people were watching our interaction with intense interest. Look, I know this might seem insensitive. Insensitive? I laughed softly. Marcus, we spent 18 months in mediation while you were secretly planning your future with someone else. If I found that insensitive, I certainly wouldn't be here toasting your happiness. That seemed to throw him off balance. He'd been prepared for tears, anger, accusations. He wasn't prepared for gracious acceptance. I'm glad you're taking this so well, he said carefully. Why wouldn't I? You've clearly found your perfect match. I gestured toward Sophia, who was watching us from across the room. She's lovely, and so young. 28, isn't she? Age is just a number, Emma. Of course it is. I raised my champagne glass. To new beginnings. Marcus hesitated, then lifted his own glass. To new beginnings. We drank, and I could see confusion in his eyes. This wasn't going according to whatever script he'd imagined. I should let you get back to your guests, I said. But Marcus, could I have just one moment in private? There's something I'd like to give you. A wedding gift, you might say. Now the confusion turned to suspicion. Emma, nothing dramatic, I promise. Just something that belongs to you. He looked around the room again, calculating. We were still the center of attention, and walking away from his gracious ex-wife might look bad. 5 minutes? The club's business office should be private. Perfect. The business office was located off the main corridor, a wood-paneled room with leather chairs and built-in bookshelves. Marcus closed the door behind us, and the sounds of the party became muted. What is this about, Emma? I set my champagne glass on the desk and opened my purse, withdrawing a manila envelope. Your wedding gift. I thought you should have this before you start your new life. He eyed the envelope suspiciously, but took it, opening the flap and pulling out the contents. His face went white as he recognized the documents, bank statements, credit card bills, expense reports, screenshots of emails, and at the bottom, a copy of the letter I'd sent to the fraud division of the district attorney's office. Jesus Christ, Emma, what have you done? What you forced me to do, I replied calmly. I spent 18 months wondering what I'd done wrong in our marriage, Marcus. 18 months thinking I wasn't good enough, wasn't interesting enough, wasn't woman enough to keep my husband happy. He was frantically shuffling through the papers, his breathing becoming shallow. You can't. This is vindictive and accurate. Every document is authentic. Every expense report is real. Every receipt is genuine. I retrieved my champagne and took another sip. Did you really think I wouldn't notice the discrepancies? I'm a lawyer, Marcus. Details are literally my profession. The statute of limitations hasn't expired. And embezzlement. That's a felony. Multiple counts, actually, given the timeline and amounts involved. Marcus sank into one of the leather chairs, the papers scattered across his lap. Why now? Why tonight? Because this morning, when our divorce became final, I realized something important. For 18 months, I've been carrying the shame of a failed marriage. Your friends, your colleagues, even some of my own friends, they all believed I was the problem. The demanding wife who drove her husband away. I moved to the window, looking out at the party guests visible through the glass. But I wasn't the problem, Marcus. I was just married to one. Emma, we can work this out. You don't understand the consequences of what you're doing. I understand perfectly. I understand that Detective Morrison expects to file charges next week. I understand that your law firm will likely terminate you when they discover you've been stealing from client expense accounts. I understand that Sophia is going to learn exactly who she's really engaged to. I turned back to face him. What I don't understand is how you thought you could build a future on a foundation of lies and theft. Marcus's face had shifted from white to gray. He was finally grasping the scope of what I'd compiled. The firm, my partnership, will probably sue you for damages, along with the clients whose money you've been spending on your double life. This will destroy me. No, Marcus. You destroyed yourself. I just documented it. A soft knock on the door interrupted us. Marcus, are you in there? Sophia's voice was concerned. People are asking about the toast. I finished my champagne and set the glass down. You should go. Your fiancé is waiting, and your guests are expecting a speech about love and commitment and building a life together. Emma, please, I'm begging you. If you ever loved me, I did love you. For 12 years, I loved you completely. But love doesn't mean protecting someone from the consequences of their choices. I moved toward the door. Besides, this isn't about revenge, Marcus. It's about justice. All those people you've stolen from, all those clients who trusted you, they deserve better. I paused with my hand on the doorknob. Oh, and Marcus, you might want to think carefully about that toast. Because after tonight, everything you say will likely be scrutinized by investigators. I opened the door to find Sophia standing in the hallway, her engagement ring catching the light from the crystal chandelier above. Sophia, I said warmly, congratulations on your engagement. I hope you have a wonderful evening. She looked between Marcus and me, clearly sensing tension. Thank you. That's very kind of you. Marriage is such a beautiful commitment, I continued. The promise to know each other completely, to share everything, to build a life based on trust and honesty. I'm sure you and Marcus will be very happy together. I walked away, leaving them both standing in the doorway of the business office, Sophia beginning to ask questions Marcus wouldn't want to answer. Back in the ballroom, I moved through the crowd one last time, saying goodbye to the few people who had remained genuinely friendly during the divorce. The party was still in full swing, but I could sense an undercurrent of tension as word spread that something had happened between Marcus and his ex-wife. At the valet stand, David handed me my keys with a knowing smile. Have a good evening, Mrs. Whitmore. I think I will, David. Thank you. As I drove down the winding road away from the country club, I could see the lights of the ballroom in my rearview mirror. In a few minutes, Marcus would have to return to his engagement party and pretend everything was fine. He'd have to make a toast about love and fidelity and building a future together, all while knowing that his own future was about to crumble. Tomorrow, the real work would begin. Detective Morrison would file charges. Marcus's law firm would begin their internal investigation. Sophia would start asking questions about the man she'd agreed to marry. But tonight, driving through the city with the windows down and classical music playing on the radio, I felt something I hadn't experienced in over a year. Peace. My phone buzzed with a text from Rachel. How did it go? I stopped at a red light and typed back, justice served. We'll call tomorrow. The light turned green, and I drove toward my house now, according to the divorce settlement, thinking about the future Marcus had written off in his emails to Sophia. He'd called it a suburban prison, a place where I'd grow old and bitter. He was wrong about the bitter part. Tonight had cured me of bitterness. Tonight had reminded me who I really was. Not the discarded wife of a cheating husband, but a woman who had built a successful career, who had integrity, who had the strength to fight for what was right. Marcus had spent 12 years underestimating me. He'd assumed I was too trusting to notice his lies, too comfortable to challenge his betrayal, too weak to fight back. He'd been wrong about all of it. As I pulled into my driveway, I could see the light in my home office window where my laptop waited with folders full of evidence that would ensure justice was served. Tomorrow would bring phone calls from prosecutors, meetings with investigators, and probably attempts at plea bargains from Marcus's lawyer. But tonight was mine. Tonight was the end of one chapter and the beginning of another. I sat in my car for a moment, looking up at the house I'd fought to keep, thinking about the woman who had signed those divorce papers this morning. She'd been scared, uncertain about her future, carrying the weight of a failed marriage. The woman walking up the front steps tonight was different. She was free, vindicated, and finally ready to build the life she deserved. The engagement party was still going on across town, but the real celebration was just beginning. The phone rang at 6:30 the next morning. I'd been awake for an hour, sitting in my kitchen with coffee and the Sunday paper, when Marcus's name appeared on the caller ID. I let it go to voicemail, then it rang again. And again. On the fourth call, I answered. "Hello, Marcus?" "Emma, thank God." His voice was hoarse, strained. "We need to talk, please. This has gotten completely out of hand." "Has it?" I took a sip of coffee, watching a cardinal land on the feeder outside my kitchen window. "I thought it was rather restrained, actually." Sophia left. The words came out in a rush. "Last night, after the party. She said she needs time to think. The engagement is off." I felt a flicker of something. Not sympathy exactly, but recognition of another woman who'd discovered her life wasn't what she thought it was. "I'm sorry to hear that. Are you? Are you really?" His voice turned sharp. "Because this is exactly what you wanted, isn't it? To destroy my relationship, my career, my entire life? I wanted justice, Marcus. For the people you stole from. For the lies you told. For the 12 years I spent married to someone I didn't really know." I stood up, moving to the window. What Sophia does with the information about who you really are, that's her choice to make. "The partners are calling an emergency meeting tomorrow morning. They want me to bring legal representation." Of course they did. Henderson, Walsh & Associates had built their reputation on integrity and client trust. Having a partner caught embezzling funds would be catastrophic for the firm. "You should probably hire someone good," I said. "Emma, please." "I know you're angry. I'm not angry, Marcus. Anger is what I felt 18 months ago when I first suspected you were cheating. What I feel now is satisfied. Silence stretched between us. Then, what do you want?" "I want you to face the consequences of your choices. I want the clients you stole from to get their money back. I want everyone who believed your lies about our marriage to know the truth." I paused, watching the cardinal fly away. "And I want you to stop calling me." I hung up and blocked his number. By Monday morning, the story had spread through our social circle like wildfire. My phone buzzed constantly with texts from friends, acquaintances, and even people I barely knew, all wanting to know if the rumors were true. Rachel arrived at my house at 8 o'clock with bagels and a newspaper. "You made the business section," she announced, dropping the paper on my kitchen table. The headline read, "Local Attorney Under Investigation for Embezzlement." The article was brief but damning. It mentioned the ongoing investigation, the amounts involved, and the fact that Marcus had been suspended from his law firm pending resolution of the charges. What it didn't mention was my role in providing the evidence, though anyone who knew us could probably connect the dots. "How are you feeling about all this?" Rachel asked, settling into the chair across from me. "Honestly, relieved." I scanned the article, noting the professional tone and factual presentation. For so long I thought I was going crazy. The gaslighting, the lies, the way he made me question my own perceptions. Having it all validated in black and white feels good. And Sophia? I'd been thinking about Sophia since Marcus's call yesterday morning. She was 28 years old, just starting her career, and she'd been manipulated by a man twice her age with decades more experience in deception. "I feel sorry for her," I said honestly. "She was another one of his victims, really." Rachel raised an eyebrow. That's surprisingly generous, considering she was sleeping with your husband. Ex-husband. And she didn't know he was still married when it started. I pulled up the timeline on my phone, showing Rachel the dates I'd compiled. According to his emails, he told her we were already separated and just working through the legal formalities. By the time she realized he was lying about that, she was already emotionally invested. You've really thought this through. I've had 18 months to think it through. And the more I learned about his pattern of lies, the more I realized that everyone around Marcus was being manipulated to some degree. His colleagues who covered for him, his friends who believed his version of our marriage troubles, even Sophia herself. My phone rang, displaying Detective Morrison's number. Mrs. Whitmore? I hope I'm not calling too early. Not at all, Detective. What can I do for you? We've reviewed all the evidence you provided, and I wanted to give you an update before we proceed. The district attorney has decided to file formal charges. We'll be executing a search warrant at Mr. Whitmore's office this afternoon. I felt a mix of vindication and finality. What happens next? He'll be arrested and arraigned, probably within the next 48 hours. Given the amount of money involved and the duration of the scheme, we're looking at multiple felony counts. His attorney will likely try to negotiate a plea deal. After hanging up, I found Rachel watching me with concern. No regrets? She asked. I considered the question seriously. 24 hours ago, Marcus had been a respected attorney with a successful practice and a beautiful fiancée. By tonight, he'd likely be under arrest. No regrets, I said firmly. He made his choices. I just made sure there were consequences. The afternoon brought a parade of phone calls. First, Marcus's law partner David Henderson, asking if I'd be willing to provide testimony about Marcus's financial activities during our marriage. Then reporters wanting quotes about the investigation. Then unexpectedly Sophia, Emma? This is Sophia Chen, I hope it's okay that I'm calling. Of course. How are you holding up? A pause. I don't know, honestly. I feel like my entire life has been turned upside down. Marcus told me so many things that apparently weren't true. I'm sorry you're going through this. It's a terrible feeling, realizing someone you trusted has been lying to you. Can I ask you something? Did you know about us during your marriage? I'd been expecting this question. I suspected something was wrong for about 18 months. I didn't know specifically about you until much later, when I found the emails and receipts. The money he spent on me, the dinners, the trips, even this ring. It was all stolen? I'm afraid so. The investigators will be able to trace the specific transactions, but based on what I documented, yes. Another pause. I had no idea. He told me he'd gotten a promotion, that his divorce settlement was almost finalized, that you were being unreasonable about asset division. I believed him completely. Sophia, you were manipulated by someone with a lot of experience in manipulation. That's not your fault. I keep thinking I should have known. Should have asked more questions? Why would you? When someone you love tells you something, you believe them. That's what normal people do. I thought about all the times I'd done the same thing, accepting Marcus's explanations even when my instincts said something was wrong. The problem isn't that we trusted. The problem is that he wasn't trustworthy. When we hung up, I felt an unexpected connection to this young woman I'd never met, but who'd been caught up in Marcus's web of lies just as I had been. That evening, the local news ran a story about Marcus's arrest. I watched from my living room as footage showed him being escorted from his office building, his expensive suit wrinkled, his silver hair disheveled. The reporter mentioned the investigation, the suspended law license, and the potential prison time he was facing. What struck me most was how ordinary he looked. For 12 years, I'd seen him as larger than life, charming, successful, powerful. Now he just looked like what he was, a middle-aged man who'd made terrible choices and was finally facing consequences. My doorbell rang during the 10 o'clock news. Through the peephole, I saw a young woman with long black hair, holding what appeared to be a jewelry box. It was Sophia. I hope it's not too late, she said when I opened the door. I wanted to return this. She held out the jewelry box, which I realized contained the engagement ring Marcus had given her. You don't need to. Yes, I do. It was bought with stolen money and it represents a lie. I can't keep it. She looked exhausted, her eyes red from crying. I also wanted to thank you. Thank me? For showing me who he really was before I married him. I can't imagine how much worse this would have been if I'd found out after we were married. I invited her in for tea, and we spent the next 2 hours talking. Sophia told me about how she'd met Marcus, how he'd pursued her, how charming and attentive he'd been. She described the same patterns I remembered from our early relationship: the expensive gifts, the exclusive restaurants, the sense of being chosen by someone important and powerful. The worst part, she said, cradling her tea mug, is that I feel stupid. All the signs were there. He never wanted me to meet his friends from work, he was vague about his divorce timeline, and he insisted on paying for everything even when I offered to split costs. You weren't stupid. You were trusting. There's a difference. Were you? Trusting, I mean, when you first married him? I thought back to the woman I'd been 12 years ago, fresh out of law school, impressed by Marcus's established career and confident demeanor. Completely. I thought his success meant he was someone I could build a life with. I didn't realize that some people will do anything to maintain the appearance of success, even if it means lying to everyone around them. Sophia stayed until almost midnight, and by the time she left, something unexpected had happened. We'd become allies, two women who'd been deceived by the same man and were now helping each other make sense of the wreckage. The next morning brought news that Marcus had been denied bail. The judge had ruled that given the amount of money involved and the systematic nature of the fraud, he was a flight risk. He'd be staying in jail until his trial. His law firm released a statement formally terminating his partnership and announcing their full cooperation with the investigation. They also established a fund to help reimburse clients who'd been affected by Marcus's theft. I spent the day fielding calls from prosecutors, giving interviews to investigators, and providing additional documentation. It was exhausting, but necessary work, and each conversation reinforced my conviction that I'd done the right thing. That afternoon, I received an unexpected visitor, Marcus's mother, Patricia. Patricia Whitmore was a formidable woman in her 70s, the kind of old-money matriarch who'd never worked a day in her life but commanded respect through sheer force of personality. She'd never particularly liked me, considering me insufficiently social for her son's position in society. "Emma," she said when I opened the door, "we need to talk." I led her to the living room, noting how she surveyed the space with the same critical eye she'd always used. Nothing had changed in her assessment of my worthiness. "I suppose you're quite pleased with yourself," she began, settling into my antique armchair as if she owned it. "I'm satisfied that justice is being served." "Justice?" She laughed bitterly. "You've destroyed my son's life out of spite. Your son destroyed his own life through his choices. I simply documented them. Marcus made mistakes, yes. But this vindictive crusade of yours will accomplish nothing except ruining multiple lives." I studied her face, seeing the same entitled arrogance that Marcus had inherited. Multiple lives were already ruined, Patricia. The clients he stole from, the employees who lost their jobs when his cases had to be reassigned, the people who trusted him and were betrayed. I just made sure someone was held accountable. He could go to prison. Yes, he could. That's what happens when you commit felony embezzlement. She leaned forward, her voice dropping to the persuasive tone she'd probably used to get her way for decades. "What would it take for you to reconsider? To perhaps soften your testimony? Marcus has learned his lesson, I'm sure. He could make restitution, accept responsibility, rebuild his life without prison." The offer hung in the air between us. I could see she was serious, probably prepared to offer significant money to make me disappear from her son's legal troubles. "Patricia," I said gently, "even if I wanted to help Marcus, which I don't, it's too late. The evidence speaks for itself. The prosecutors don't need my cooperation to convict him. They have bank records, credit card statements, email communications, and documentation from multiple sources. This isn't about my testimony anymore. It's about the facts." Her composure cracked slightly. "He's my only child." For the first time, I felt genuine sympathy for her. Whatever Marcus's crimes, He was still her son. I understand that this is painful for you, but Marcus is an adult who made deliberate choices over an extended period. He didn't steal money in a moment of desperation or weakness. He systematically defrauded his clients and his firm while building a double life. That's not a mistake. It's a pattern of criminal behavior. She left shortly afterward, but not before delivering one final barb. I hope you can live with the consequences of your choices, Emma, because this isn't over. The threat was empty, and we both knew it. But it reminded me that while Marcus was facing legal consequences, his family and friends might not be as forgiving. I'd need to stay vigilant in the coming months. That evening, as I prepared for bed, I reflected on how much had changed in just 3 days. On Friday morning, I'd been a recently divorced woman starting over. By Monday night, I was a key witness in a major financial crimes case, an unlikely ally to my ex-husband's former fiancé, and apparently a target for the Whitmore family's blame and anger. But I was also something else. Free. For the first time in years, I wasn't carrying the weight of secrets, lies, and half-truths. I wasn't wondering what I'd done wrong or how I could fix a relationship that had been broken from the start. I wasn't walking on eggshells around someone who'd been systematically deceiving me. The future was uncertain, but it was mine to shape. And that was worth whatever challenges lay ahead. 3 months after Marcus's arrest, I sat in the witness box of the county courthouse, raising my right hand to swear that the testimony I was about to give would be the truth. The whole truth, and nothing but the truth. In the gallery behind me, I could see familiar faces, some supportive, some curious, some openly hostile. Marcus sat at the defendant's table in an orange jumpsuit, his silver hair now showing gray roots, his confident bearing replaced by the defeated slump of a man who'd finally run out of lies to tell. He'd aged years in the months since his arrest, and for a brief moment, I almost felt sorry for him. Almost. Mrs. Whitmore, the prosecutor began. Can you please tell the court about your relationship to the defendant? We were married for 12 years. Our divorce was finalized on October 15th of last year. And during your marriage, did you have access to the defendant's financial records? Yes. We maintained joint accounts and I handled most of our personal financial management. I also assisted with some of his business documentation when he was overwhelmed with casework. For the next 2 hours, I walked the jury through the evidence I'd compiled. Bank statements that showed suspicious patterns of spending, credit card bills that revealed expensive dinners and hotel stays during supposed business trips, email communications that demonstrated deliberate deception of both his employers and his clients. Marcus's attorney, a sharp-dressed woman named Victoria Chase, tried her best to discredit my testimony during cross-examination. She painted me as a bitter ex-wife seeking revenge, suggested that my evidence gathering had been invasive and possibly illegal, and implied that I'd misinterpreted innocent business expenses. But the facts spoke for themselves. The financial trail was clear, the amounts were substantial, and the timeline showed a pattern of escalating theft that had continued right up until his arrest. Mrs. Whitmore, Victoria Chase said during her final questions, isn't it true that you deliberately withheld this information from your ex-husband for over a year, allowing him to continue what you claim was criminal behavior? I'd been expecting this question and had prepared for it carefully. I documented the suspicious activity, yes, but I also consulted with law enforcement about the proper way to handle potential financial crimes. I was advised to continue gathering evidence rather than confronting him directly, which could have resulted in destruction of evidence or flight. So you were working with police throughout this period? I was following their guidance to ensure that any investigation would be thorough and complete. It was true, though not the whole truth. I'd only contacted Detective Morrison after I'd already compiled most of my evidence. But the prosecutor had coached me on how to frame my cooperation in the most favorable light. When I stepped down from the witness stand, I felt a mixture of exhaustion and relief. My part in the legal proceedings was largely over. The rest would be up to the jury. In the hallway outside the courtroom, I was approached by several people. First, David Henderson from Marcus's former law firm, who thanked me for my cooperation and updated me on their efforts to reimburse affected clients. Then Jennifer Walsh from my old book club, who awkwardly invited me to their next meeting. Finally, unexpectedly, Sophia. "How are you holding up?" she asked as we walked toward the parking garage together. "Better than I expected." "You?" "The same, actually. I started therapy, which has helped me process everything." She paused as we reached my car. "I wanted to tell you, I've been thinking about what you said, about using this experience to help other people." Over the past months, Sophia and I had developed an unlikely friendship. We'd discovered that we had more in common than just being deceived by the same man. We shared similar professional interests, both enjoyed hiking, and had both been struggling with questions about trust and relationships. "What did you have in mind?" "I've been researching organizations that help people recognize and recover from financial abuse. There's a real gap in resources, especially for educated professional women who think they're too smart to be manipulated." She was right. During my own research, I'd been struck by how little information was available about the sophisticated forms of financial and emotional manipulation that people like Marcus employed. Most resources focused on obvious abuse, not the subtle undermining and gaslighting that could trap intelligent, successful people for years. "I'd like to be involved," I said. "When this trial is over, maybe we can explore some options." The trial lasted another week. Marcus's defense team tried to paint him as a man who'd made mistakes under pressure, someone who'd gotten in over his head and was now genuinely remorseful. They brought character witnesses who testified about his charitable work and community involvement. They emphasized his previously clean record and his cooperation with the investigation. But the prosecution's case was overwhelming. They'd traced every stolen dollar, documented every lie, and presented evidence of deliberate, systematic fraud spanning nearly 2 years. The jury deliberated for less than 4 hours before returning a guilty verdict on all counts. Marcus was sentenced to 8 years in federal prison and ordered to pay full restitution to his victims. His law license was permanently revoked, his pension forfeited, and his remaining assets liquidated to help cover the financial damages. I watched from the gallery as he was led away in handcuffs. His mother was crying in the front row, and I felt a complicated mix of vindication and sadness. Justice had been served, but it had come at a tremendous cost to everyone involved. Outside the courthouse, reporters wanted statements about the verdict and the sentence. I kept my comments brief and professional, emphasizing that this had always been about accountability rather than personal revenge. But privately, I felt a deep sense of closure that had been building for months. The week after the trial ended, I received an unexpected phone call from my former law school classmate. "Maria Santos. Emma, I've been following the news about your ex-husband's case. I wanted to reach out because I think you might be interested in an opportunity I'm working on." Maria had gone into white-collar, criminal defense after law school and had built a reputation as one of the best financial crimes attorneys on the East Coast. She was also, I knew, someone who'd always prioritized ethics over profits. "What kind of opportunity?" "I'm starting a consultation practice focused on helping people identify and document financial crimes. The Marcus Whitmore case has gotten a lot of attention in legal circles, not just because of the amounts involved, but because of how thoroughly you documented everything. There's a real need for someone who can teach people how to protect themselves." The idea intrigued me. For months, I'd been thinking about what to do next with my career. My legal consulting work had dried up during the divorce proceedings, and while I had enough money to live comfortably, I needed something meaningful to focus my energy on. Tell me more. Think about it. How many people are in relationships with partners who are financially abusing them, but don't recognize it? How many small business owners are being embezzled by employees or partners, but don't know what signs to look for? How many elderly people are being taken advantage of by caretakers or family members? She was right. Financial abuse was everywhere, but most people didn't know how to recognize it, document it, or seek help. And the legal system was often ill-equipped to handle cases that required extensive financial analysis and documentation. I'd be interested in discussing it further. There's something else. I've been contacted by 3 other attorneys who've had similar cases in the past year, all involving sophisticated financial manipulation, all requiring extensive documentation, all cases where the victims had to essentially build their own evidence files. We're thinking about creating a network of specialists who can help people in these situations. A month later, I found myself in a conference room in downtown Boston, meeting with Maria and 4 other attorneys who specialized in various aspects of financial crimes. By the end of the day, we'd outlined a plan for a consulting firm that would help individuals and organizations identify, document, and prosecute financial abuse. We called it Cornerstone Consulting, and within 6 months, we had our first major case. The client was a woman named Dr. Rebecca Kim, a successful pediatrician whose business partner had been systematically stealing from their practice for years. Like me, she'd noticed discrepancies but had been gaslit into thinking she was being paranoid. Like me, she'd started documenting everything once she realized the scope of the theft. Unlike me, she'd had somewhere to turn for help. Working with Rebecca was incredibly rewarding. I was able to use everything I'd learned during my investigation of Marcus to help her build an airtight case against her partner. More importantly, I was able to provide emotional support to someone going through the same feelings of betrayal and self-doubt that I'd experienced. The case resulted in a successful prosecution and full restitution for Rebecca's practice. But more than that, it validated my belief that my experience with Marcus could be turned into something positive and meaningful. As Cornerstone Consulting grew, I found myself traveling frequently, consulting with attorneys, speaking at conferences, and training law enforcement officers in financial crime documentation. I also began working more closely with victim advocacy organizations, helping them develop resources for people dealing with financial abuse. Sophia had followed through on her own plans, founding a nonprofit organization called Trust Recovery that provided support and resources for victims of relationship fraud. We often collaborated on cases, and she became one of my closest friends and most trusted colleagues. 2 years after the trial, I received a letter from Marcus. It had been forwarded through my attorney, as I'd requested no direct contact. The letter was short and carefully worded, probably reviewed by his prison counselor before being sent. He apologized for the pain he'd caused, acknowledged that his actions had been wrong, and said he was working on understanding why he'd made such destructive choices. He didn't ask for forgiveness or suggest that we reconcile when he was released. He simply wanted me to know that he took full responsibility for his actions and hoped I was building a happy life. I read the letter twice, then filed it away. I believed his remorse was genuine, but it didn't change anything. He was serving his sentence, and I was building my future. Our paths had diverged permanently, and I was content with that outcome. The 3rd anniversary of my divorce fell on a crisp October morning. I was in my office at Cornerstone Consulting, reviewing case files for our latest investigation, when I realized the significance of the date. 3 years ago, I'd sat in a courthouse hallway, signing papers that ended my marriage. That same afternoon, I'd received the invitation to Marcus's engagement party. Now I sat in an office of my own creation, running a successful business that helped people reclaim their lives from financial predators. I had meaningful work, strong friendships, and a sense of purpose that I'd never experienced during my marriage. My phone buzzed with a text from Sophia. "Coffee later? I have updates on the Johnson case." The Johnson case involved an elderly man whose caregiver had been stealing from him for months. It was exactly the kind of case that Cornerstone Consulting had been created to handle, and Sophia's organization was providing emotional support to the victim's family. I texted back, "Absolutely. 4 p.m. at our usual place?" As I prepared to leave the office that evening, I reflected on the journey that had brought me here. 3 years ago, I'd been a woman whose life had been defined by her relationship to someone else. I'd been Marcus's wife, then Marcus's ex-wife, then the woman who'd exposed Marcus's crimes. But somewhere along the way, I'd become simply Emma again. Emma who ran her own business, Emma who helped other people find justice, Emma, who had friends and interests and goals that had nothing to do with any man's opinion of her worth. The woman who'd signed those divorce papers 3 years ago had been scared of the future, uncertain about her ability to build a life alone. The woman leaving the office tonight was confident, purposeful, and genuinely excited about what tomorrow might bring. Walking to my car in the parking garage, I remembered something my mother had told me years ago. Sometimes the worst thing that happens to you turns out to be the best thing that could have happened. At the time, she'd been talking about a job I'd been fired from that led to better opportunities. But her words applied equally well to my divorce from Marcus. Being betrayed by someone I'd trusted completely had been devastating. But it had also forced me to discover strengths I didn't know I possessed, and to build a life that was entirely my own creation. My phone rang as I drove through the city, and I smiled when I saw Rachel's name on the caller ID. "How was your day?" she asked. "Productive. Meaningful. Good." I paused at a red light, watching people cross the street in front of me, all of them heading toward their own lives and futures. "How was yours?" "The same. I was thinking we should celebrate this weekend. It's been 3 years since you got your freedom." Freedom. That was exactly what it had been, though I hadn't recognized it at the time. Freedom from lies, from manipulation, from living a life built on someone else's deceptions. "I'd like that," I said. "But let's not call it celebrating my divorce. Let's call it celebrating my independence. Even better, I'll make reservations at that new place downtown." After we hung up, I drove through the city toward my house. The house I'd fought for and won, the house that was entirely mine now. The sun was setting behind the buildings, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. 3 years ago, I'd driven away from Marcus's engagement party, feeling a mixture of satisfaction and uncertainty. Tonight, I drove toward my future feeling something much simpler and more powerful: contentment. The revenge I'd sought hadn't been about destroying Marcus, though that had been a necessary consequence of his choices. The real revenge had been proving that I could build something better from the wreckage of what he'd tried to destroy. As I pulled into my driveway, I could see the lights in my home office where my laptop waited with case files for tomorrow's work. Important work, meaningful work, work that helped people reclaim their lives and find justice. Marcus would be in prison for another 5 years. When he got out, he'd be a 60-year-old convicted felon with no law license, no career prospects, and a reputation that would follow him forever. But that wasn't my concern anymore. His future was his responsibility, just as mine was mine. I walked up the front steps to my house, thinking about the woman who'd lived here during her marriage, who'd hidden in her study late at night, gathering evidence and building a case while her husband mocked her to his friends and his mistress. That woman had been stronger than she knew, smarter than she gave herself credit for, and more capable than anyone around her had recognized. She'd been preparing for this moment, this life, all along. The porch light came on automatically as I approached the door, illuminating the nameplate that read simply, E. Whitmore. Soon, I'd change it to E. Matthews, reclaiming my maiden name along with everything else I'd built. But that was tomorrow's project. Tonight was for reflecting on how far I'd come, how much I'd grown, and how perfectly the life I'd created fit the woman I'd discovered myself to be. The engagement party had been 3 years and a lifetime ago. Tonight was about celebrating not just my survival, but my transformation. After all, the best revenge isn't about destroying your enemies. It's about becoming so successful, so fulfilled, and so genuinely happy that their opinions become irrelevant, and I'd achieved that beyond my wildest dreams. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.